I didn't know his name, but he already knew mine, and all it took was one stupid decision at 1:47 a.m. The coffee had gone cold in my hands hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway just to stay awake long enough to finish my shift, the diner nearly empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft buzz of neon lights flickering outside the window. The kind of quiet that feels safe until it doesn't, until something small shifts and suddenly the night feels like it's watching you back. And that's when I saw the phone, lying face down in the corner booth like it had been forgotten or abandoned, sleek black, expensive, completely out of place in a place where people counted dollars before ordering pie. I told myself to ignore it, not my business, not my problem, but the screen lit up before I could walk away. A name flashing across it that didn't look like a name at all, just a single word in all caps, calling. And before I could stop myself my hand reached out, I picked it up, hesitated for half a second, then answered, "Hello?" I said, already regretting it, already wishing I could undo that 1 second. The line went silent, not disconnected, just quiet, like the person on the other end was deciding something, measuring me. And then his voice came through low and controlled and so calm it made my fingers tighten around the phone. "That's not your phone," he said, not asking, stating, and something in my chest dropped because he was right and somehow that mattered more than it should have. I found it," I said quickly, trying to sound normal, trying to sound like someone who hadn't just stepped into something she didn't understand. I was going to turn it in. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear faint background noise on his end like distant engines or maybe just the echo of a large empty space, and then he spoke again, softer this time but somehow worse. "Where are you?" I should have hung up right there, any smart person would have, but I didn't, maybe because I was tired, maybe because I didn't want trouble, or maybe because something in his voice didn't sound angry, it sounded alone, just a diner, I said, already stepping toward the door, already planning to leave the phone behind and pretend this never happened. "I'll leave it here," I added, like that would end it, like that would make everything go back to normal. But he didn't let me go that easily. "Don't," he said, just one word, quiet but absolute. And my steps stopped before I even realized I'd obeyed him, my heart starting to beat a little faster now, the neon light outside flickering again, the reflection in the window showing me a girl holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should. "You picked it up," he continued, and there was something different in his tone now, something sharper beneath the calm. "Which means you heard something you weren't meant to." I frowned, confused, because I hadn't heard anything except him, except that voice that now felt like it was reaching through the line and pulling me into something I couldn't see. "I didn't hear anything," I said, but even as I said it I wasn't sure if that was true, because there had been something, a faint voice before he spoke, a sentence I hadn't fully processed, something about a time, a place, something that didn't belong in a normal conversation, the kind of thing you forget until someone reminds you it matters. And the way he exhaled on the other end told me he knew that too. "Stay where you are," he said, and this time it wasn't a suggestion, it was a decision, like he had already moved pieces on a board I couldn't see, like my part in this had already been written the second I said hello. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. I hadn't just answered a stranger's phone, I had stepped into someone else's world, and whoever he was, he wasn't the kind of man you hang up on and walk away from. I should have left the phone on the table and walked out into the night like nothing had happened, but my feet stayed rooted to the floor as if that single word had locked something inside me in place. "Stay where you are," it echoed louder than it should have, louder than the hum of the refrigerator, louder than the distant sound of a car passing outside, and I hated that I listened. I hated that my body reacted before my mind could argue. "I cannot do that," I said, trying to steady my voice, trying to sound like I still had control over the situation. "I am leaving the phone here and going home." I reached toward the booth again, ready to drop it and walk away, to pretend this entire thing never happened. But his voice came back sharper this time, not louder, just more precise, like every word had been chosen carefully. "If you walk away now, you will not make it 2 blocks before someone else finds you first." My hand froze midair, the weight of what he said sinking in slowly, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just matter of fact, and that made it worse, because it did not sound like a threat, it sounded like information, like he was telling me the weather or the time. Something inevitable, something already in motion. "What does that mean?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry, my eyes flicking toward the window where the street looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago, empty, quiet, harmless, but now it felt different. Like there were things I could not see just outside the glass. It means, he said slowly, that the phone you are holding does not belong in a place like that, and neither do the things connected to it. I swallowed, my grip tightening. I did not hear anything, I repeated. Even though now I was not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. Another pause, shorter this time, like he had already made a decision. You heard enough, he said, and then softer, almost like he was thinking out loud. You stayed on the line. Something in my chest shifted at that, something I could not explain. I did not know who it was, I said, defensive now, frustrated. I was just trying to return a lost phone. The words sounded small even as I said them, like they belonged to a different world than the one I had just stepped into. People who find that phone usually do not answer it, he replied, and there it was again, that quiet edge, not anger, not panic, just certainty, like he had seen this scenario play out before and it had never ended well. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and for the first time there was a slight shift in the silence on his end, not hesitation, not weakness, just a fraction of something human breaking through the control. You wait, he said, and this time his voice dropped just enough to make it feel closer, more personal. I will come to you. My heart skipped, not because of fear exactly, but because of how inevitable he made it sound, like distance did not matter, like time did not matter, like he had already closed the gap between us the moment I answered the call. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 1:52 a.m. 5 minutes had passed, but it felt like something had already changed, something I could not undo. How do I know I can trust you? I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between us, fragile and almost pointless, because deep down I knew trust was not something I had been offered, it was something I was being forced to consider, and his answer came without hesitation, calm and unshaken. You do not, he said, but right now I am the only reason you are still standing there instead of running. My breath caught at that, my reflection in the window staring back at me, eyes wide, fingers still wrapped around a phone that was no longer just a phone. And that was the moment I realized I had already made the mistake that mattered, not picking it up, not answering the call, but staying on the line long enough for him to decide that I was part of his world now. I did not move even after the line went silent because somehow the silence felt louder than his voice had been, like something had shifted in the air around me that I could not see but could definitely feel. The kind of pressure that makes your skin tighten without a reason. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, but I did not hang up. I could still hear the faint connection, still feel him there on the other end like a presence that refused to leave, and that scared me more than anything he had actually said. I glanced toward the door again, the glass reflecting the empty street outside, a single streetlight flickering at the corner, everything exactly the same and yet completely different, because now I knew I was not alone in this moment. Even if I could not see anyone, you are still there, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through my thoughts like he had been listening to every breath I took. I lifted the phone back to my ear instantly, my fingers tightening again without thinking. Yes, I whispered before I could stop myself, and I hated how small my voice sounded compared to his, how easily he seemed to pull responses out of me. Good, he replied, and there was something in that word that felt almost like approval. Controlled but unmistakable. That means you are thinking. I frowned slightly, confused. Thinking about what? I asked, trying to regain some ground, trying to sound less like someone caught in something she did not understand. About whether to run, he said, calm as ever, and realizing that if you do, you will not know where to run to. My chest tightened because he was right again, not because I trusted him but because I suddenly did not trust the quiet outside anymore, the kind of quiet that feels too perfect, too untouched, like it is waiting for something to break it. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to think. Why me? I asked finally, the question that had been building since the moment I answered the call. I just picked up a phone. Another pause. But this time it felt different, heavier, like he was choosing how much to say. Because you did not hang up, he said, and there was a slight shift in his tone now, not softer exactly but less distant, like the words carried more weight than before. Most people would have, he added, they would hear nothing, feel something was wrong, and disconnect immediately. I swallowed, remembering that moment, that hesitation, that second where I could have ended everything before it started. I thought someone might need help, I admitted quietly, and for the first time there was a longer silence on his end, not empty, not disconnected, just still, like I had said something he had not expected, something that did not fit into whatever system he was used to. That is not a common instinct, he said after a few seconds, and there was something different in his voice now, something I could not quite place, not warmth, not kindness, but curiosity, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time through. Nothing but a voice on a line, it usually gets people into trouble, he continued, and I let out a small breath that I did not realize I had been holding. I am starting to realize that, I said, my eyes drifting back to the phone in my hand. The screen now dark but still somehow alive with everything it represented. Tell me something, he said suddenly, and I straightened slightly, caught off guard by the shift. What? I asked, my voice steadier now, not because I felt safe but because I needed to hold on to something that felt like control, even if it was just a question. When you answered, he said slowly, and you heard the silence before I spoke, why did you stay? The question lingered between us, heavier than anything else he had asked, and I did not have a simple answer. I thought back to that moment, the stillness, the feeling that something was there even without sound, and the truth came out before I could filter it, because you did not sound like someone who expected anyone to stay, I said quietly, and this time the silence on the other end changed completely, not empty, not measured, but something else, something deeper, like I had just stepped into a part of him that no one else ever reached. And when he finally spoke again his voice was lower, closer, almost like he was no longer talking to a stranger but to someone he had already decided mattered more than she should. Then do not move, he said, because I am already on my way. The line did not disconnect but neither of us spoke for a few seconds and somehow that silence felt like a countdown, like something was already moving toward me from somewhere in the dark. I glanced at the clock again, 1:58 a.m. Barely 10 minutes since I picked up the phone and yet everything about the night had changed. The air inside the diner felt heavier, thicker, like it was holding its breath with me. How far are you? I asked quietly, not even sure why I asked, maybe to prove he was real, maybe to measure how much time I had left before whatever this was became something I could not walk away from. There was a faint shift on the other end, like he was stepping into a different space. Close enough, he replied, and that was not an answer, not really, but it was enough to make my chest tighten because he did not sound rushed, he did not sound like someone trying to get somewhere. He sounded like someone who had already planned every second of this. I walked slowly toward the counter, my shoes echoing softly against the tile floor. The waitress who had been there earlier was gone now, probably in the back or maybe already clocked out. I suddenly realized I had not seen anyone else for the past few minutes. The diner that had felt quietly comforting now felt empty in a way that made my skin prickle. Why does it matter if I stay? I asked, trying to fill the silence, trying to keep him talking. Because as long as he was on the line I felt like I understood at least one part of what was happening. Because movement creates variables, he said, his voice steady, controlled, and variables create risk. I let out a small breath, almost a nervous laugh but not quite. You sound like this happens often, I said, leaning lightly against the counter, my fingers tracing the edge of the cold surface just to ground myself in something real. There was a pause, shorter this time. It does, he answered simply, and there was no pride in it, no emotion at all, just a fact, and that somehow made it more unsettling. I turned slightly, looking out through the front window again, and that was when I noticed it, a car parked across the street that I did not remember seeing before, dark, still, its headlights off. Maybe it had always been there, maybe I just had not paid attention, but now I could not look away from it. There is a car outside, I said quietly, my voice dropping without meaning to. Black. Across the street, I watched as nothing happened, no movement, no sign that anyone inside even noticed me, but the longer I looked the more certain I felt that it was not just another parked car. Do not approach the window, he said. Immediately, his tone sharper than before, not loud but urgent in a way that made my stomach tighten. I stepped back instinctively, pulling away from the glass, my heart starting to beat faster now. Who is that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a brief silence and then he answered, slower this time, more deliberate. That depends, he said, on whether they saw you first or not. The words settled heavily in my chest, turning the quiet street outside into something uncertain, something I could no longer read the way I had just minutes ago. You said I would not make it 2 blocks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to hold on to logic even as the situation slipped further out of reach. So what happens if I stay? Another pause, and this one felt different, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. If you stay, he said, his voice lower now, closer somehow, then I decide what happens next, I swallowed. The weight of that statement pressing down on me, not because it was threatening but because it sounded absolute, like control was not something he took, it was something he already had, and I realized then that staying did not mean safety, it meant stepping fully into whatever world he belonged to, the kind of world where decisions were not asked for, they were made, and before I could respond, before I could even think of another question, I heard it, the low sound of an engine pulling up outside, smooth, controlled, deliberate, and his voice came through the line one last time, calm and certain. Do not move, he said, I am here. The engine sound outside did not roar or rush, it just arrived like everything else about him, controlled, precise, deliberate, and my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat as I stood frozen behind the counter, the phone still pressed to my ear even though I knew he was no longer just a voice now, he was real, he was here, and somehow that made everything feel sharper, the light above me, the hum of the machines, the faint flicker of neon against the glass, all of it suddenly too clear, too present, like the world had narrowed down to this exact moment and nothing else existed beyond it. I heard a car door open, not loud, not aggressive, just a soft solid click followed by footsteps, measured, unhurried, each one landing with quiet certainty against the pavement outside. My eyes moved toward the window before I could stop them, and for a second I saw only the reflection of myself, pale, still holding something I should have never answered, and then he stepped into view, tall, composed, dressed in dark, clean lines that made him stand out even in the dim streetlight, his posture straight, his movements economical, like he wasted nothing, not even a step, and even from across the glass I could feel it, that presence, the kind that did not need noise or force to be noticed, it simply existed, and everything else adjusted around it. I forgot to breathe as he reached for the door, pushing it open with the same controlled ease, and the small bell above it chimed once, a soft, ordinary sound that did not belong to someone like him. He stepped inside, and the space changed instantly, not louder, not tenser, just different, like the air itself recognized him before I did, and my grip on the phone tightened until I realized I was still holding it, still connected to the line that had led him here. He did not look around, he did not hesitate, his eyes found me immediately, like they had always known exactly where I would be, and for a second the distance between us felt like nothing at all. He walked forward slowly, not closing the space too quickly, not forcing anything, just approaching like he already knew I would not run, and the closer he got the more details came into focus, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint shadow of ink just visible at the edge of his collar, the way his gaze stayed steady on me, not invasive, not rushed, just certain. He stopped a few feet away, and for the first time since I answered the call I felt truly seen, not glanced at, not noticed, but understood in a way that made my chest tighten. Without warning, you stayed, he said, his voice no longer filtered through a line, but right there in front of me, deeper, fuller, impossible to ignore, and I nodded slightly because I did not trust my voice yet. I lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the counter between us like it no longer belonged to either of us, and for a moment neither of us moved. The silence stretched, but it was not empty, it was filled with everything unsaid, everything that had already passed between us without explanation. His eyes flicked briefly to the phone, then back to me, and there was something there, something I could not name, not cold, not warm, just aware, like he was recalculating something he had not expected. Do you understand what you picked up tonight? He asked quietly, and I shook my head because the truth was I did not fully, not yet, but I understood enough to know this was not something simple, not something I could walk away from like a forgotten object on a booth seat. He studied me for a second longer, then exhaled softly, not tired, not frustrated, just resolved, and when he spoke again his voice carried the same calm authority as before, but now it felt closer, more personal. Then let me make it clear, he said, his gaze holding mine without wavering. You are not here by accident anymore, and something in the way he said it made my pulse quicken, not because it sounded like a threat, but because it sounded like a decision already made long before he ever stepped through that door. The words settled between us heavier than anything he had said before, and for a second I forgot how to respond because it did not feel like a warning, it felt like a line being drawn somewhere I could not see but had already crossed without realizing it. I swallowed, slowly forcing myself to meet his gaze even though it felt like standing too close to something I did not fully understand. I did not ask for this, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended but steady enough to hold its ground. And something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not irritation, just a subtle acknowledgement, like he had expected that answer long before I spoke it. No, he replied calmly, you did not And there was no argument in his tone, no attempt to twist my words, just agreement, which somehow made it harder to push back because I could not fight something that did not resist me. I glanced down at the phone resting on the counter between us, the object that had changed everything in less than 15 minutes. It looked ordinary, again silent, still almost harmless, and yet I knew better now. I knew it carried something I could not see but was already tied to. Then, "Let me leave," I said, the words coming out more quickly this time, like if I said them fast enough they might still be true, might still be possible. He did not move, he did not block me, he did not even step closer, but the space between us felt fixed like an invisible line neither of us could ignore. "If you leave now," he said slowly, "you will walk back into a situation you do not understand without knowing where the edges are." I frowned slightly, frustration rising beneath the fear. "And staying here means I do understand it?" I asked, and for the first time there was the faintest trace of something in his eyes, something almost resembling a thought. He had not finished yet. "No," he said, "but it means you are no longer guessing alone." The words landed differently than I expected, not controlling, not demanding, just certain, like he was offering something that came with its own weight whether I accepted it or not. I exhaled quietly, running a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of everything that had happened so quickly. The quiet night, the phone, the voice, the car outside, and now him standing in front of me like he had always been part of this story even before I knew it existed. "Who are you?" I asked finally, because it felt like the only question that mattered now. Not what the phone was, not who might be outside, but him, the one constant in all of this. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, not avoiding the question but not answering it immediately either. Like names were not something he gave lightly, "someone who does not get second chances often," he said at last, and it was not a name, but it was something real, something that carried more weight than a title or a label ever could. I studied him more closely then, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way nothing about him felt rushed or uncertain, and I realized something that made my chest tighten again. This was not someone reacting to a situation, this was someone who had already decided how it would unfold in me. I asked quietly, "What am I in this?" He looked at me, then not past me, not through me, but directly at me in a way that made everything else fall silent for a second, like the world had narrowed down to just that question hanging between us. And when he answered, his voice was lower, more deliberate than before. "That depends," he said, "on whether you choose to walk away now or stay long enough to understand why you cannot." And something about the way he said it made one thing clear: before I even moved, before I even made a decision, I already knew that whatever choice I made next would not just change the night, it would change everything that came after it. I looked at him, and for the first time since all of this started I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not confusion, but something steadier, something sharper, like a line forming where there had only been reaction before, and I realized I was tired of being pulled along by something I did not understand. "No," I said quietly, and the word landed between us more solid than anything I had said before. His expression did not change, but I felt it, the way his attention narrowed just slightly, like he was recalibrating something again. "No," I repeated, this time stronger, lifting my chin just enough to hold his gaze without flinching. "I am not going to stand here and wait for you to decide what I am in your world." The silence that followed was different, not tense, not empty, just focused, like everything had slowed down to watch what would happen next. I took a breath, steadying myself, because I did not know where this confidence came from, but I knew I needed to hold on to it. "You said I stayed," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. "So now I get to ask something back." He did not interrupt, he did not step in, he just listened, and somehow that made it easier to keep going. "What happens if I leave right now and do not look back?" I asked the question directly, no hesitation, no softening, because I needed the truth, not the version that made things easier to accept. He held my gaze for a long moment, and this time there was no pause to choose words, no careful calculation, just a straight answer delivered with the same calm certainty that had followed him since the beginning. "You will make it to your car," he said, and my chest tightened slightly at how specific that sounded. "You will start the engine," he continued, his voice even steady, "and for a few minutes it will feel like nothing has changed." I swallowed, the image forming too clearly in my mind, the quiet drive, the empty street, the illusion of normal. "Then what?" I asked before I could stop myself, and this time something shifted in his expression, not emotion, not quite, but something closer to honesty than anything he had shown before. "Then you will realize that you cannot unhear what you heard, and the people who lost that phone will realize you exist," he said simply, and the way he said it made it impossible to dismiss, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just inevitable. I let out a slow breath, my fingers curling slightly against the edge of the counter as I processed that, because for the first time it did not feel Like he was trying to control me. It felt like he was explaining something I had already stepped into, and staying with you fixes that. I asked, my voice quieter now, but not weaker, just more grounded in the reality of what he was saying. He tilted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question. It does not fix it, he said, but it changes who is responsible for what happens next. The words settled deeper than I expected, and I realized that was the difference: not safety, not protection, but ownership of the outcome. I glanced toward the window again, the car still there, unmoving, a silent reminder that the world outside had already shifted whether I accepted it or not, and when I looked back at him, something inside me had already decided before I even spoke. I am not staying because you told me to, I said, slowly meeting his eyes again. I am staying because walking away now would mean pretending none of this is real, and I already know it is. There was a brief stillness after that, not heavy, not uncertain, just final, and for the first time since he walked in I saw it, not clearly, not fully, but enough, a flicker of something in his gaze, something that was not control, not calculation, but recognition, like I had just stepped out of the role he expected and into something he had not planned for. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, not weaker, just more deliberate. Then stay, he said, but understand this was your choice. And something in the way he said it made it clear that from this moment on, whatever happened next would not just belong to him, it would belong to me too. The moment the words left my mouth, the air between us shifted again, not heavier, not lighter, just clearer, like something unspoken had finally been set in place. And for the first time since this started, I did not feel like I was reacting, I felt like I was choosing. And that realization settled deep in my chest, steadying something that had been unstable since I picked up the phone. He watched me for a second longer, not questioning, not correcting, just observing in that quiet, controlled way that made it feel like he was always a step ahead, and yet this time there was something different, something less fixed, like he was adjusting to me instead of the other way around. Then we do this properly, he said finally, his voice calm but carrying a new weight, one that felt less like instruction and more like agreement. I straightened slightly without meaning to, my body responding to the shift even before my mind caught up. What does that mean, I asked, and he moved then, not closer, not imposing, just enough to reach for the phone on the counter, his fingers brushing against it briefly before he turned it face up, the screen lighting instantly like it had been waiting for him. Notifications I had not seen before flickered across it, lines of information, names, timestamps, things I did not understand but knew were not meant for someone like me to see. It means you stop thinking of this as something you can step out of later, he said, his eyes scanning the screen quickly before locking it again, the light disappearing just as fast, and you start understanding what you are already inside. I felt a small chill run through me, not from fear exactly, but from the clarity of it, because there was no comfort in his words, no attempt to soften what this was. He was not trying to convince me, he was making sure I saw it clearly. I crossed my arms lightly, grounding myself again. Then explain it, I said, because if I was staying then I needed more than fragments, more than half answers. He studied me for a second like he was deciding how much to give, and then nodded once, a small controlled motion. That phone connects to decisions that do not get written down, he said slowly, conversations that do not happen twice and people who do not repeat themselves. I held his gaze, not interrupting, not reacting, just letting the words settle, because I could feel the edges of what he was saying without needing every detail, and that somehow made it more real, not less. And now I am one of those people, I said quietly, and he did not hesitate. Now you are someone they will look for, he corrected, and the distinction mattered more than I expected. I exhaled slowly, turning that over in my mind, because it meant this was not about what I had done, it was about what I now represented, something seen, something known, something that could not be undone. I glanced again toward the window. The car still there, unmoving like it had been waiting this entire time, and when I looked back at him there was no panic left in me, no hesitation, just a steady awareness of the situation I had chosen. So what happens next, I asked, and this time my voice did not waver, because I was no longer asking out of fear, I was asking because I needed to understand my place in what came after. He stepped back slightly, just enough to create space, not distance but room, like he was giving me the moment to fully stand in what I had decided next. He said, his tone even more deliberate now, you leave with me, not because I asked you to, but because staying here is no longer neutral. I considered that for a second, the quiet diner, the empty street, the illusion of normal that had already broken, and I knew he was right again, not because he said it, but because I could feel it, the way the space around me no longer felt like mine, the way everything had shifted the second I chose to stay. I nodded once, small but certain, and reached for my jacket from the back of the chair, the movement simple, ordinary, but carrying more weight than anything else I had done tonight, and as I stepped toward the door I realized something that made my pulse steady instead of race. This was no longer about a mistake or a wrong choice. This was about stepping forward into something I had already become part of. And when he moved beside me, opening the door with that same quiet control, the night outside did not feel empty anymore. It felt like a threshold, and I had just chosen to cross it. The night air felt colder the second I stepped outside, not because the temperature had changed but because everything inside me had. The quiet street stretching out in both directions no longer looked empty. It looked watched, like something unseen had already marked this place as part of something bigger than I could understand. I paused for half a second just beyond the doorway, my hand still brushing the edge of the frame as if I could feel the line I had just crossed. Behind me the soft glow of the diner lights spilled onto the sidewalk, but it no longer felt like a place I could return to. It felt like a version of my life that had already ended. He stepped out beside me, closing the door with that same controlled movement, and the small bell chimed once before falling silent again. His presence next to me shifted everything, not closer, not overwhelming, just constant like gravity, something that did not need to announce itself to be felt. I glanced toward the car across the street, the one I had noticed earlier, and for the first time I saw movement inside, not sudden, not obvious, just enough to confirm what I already knew, that it had not been random, that nothing about this night had been random. "They are still there," I said quietly, not looking directly at him but aware of him in every way that mattered. "Yes," he replied simply, and there was no urgency in his voice, no change in his pace as he stepped forward onto the pavement, like this was expected, like he had already accounted for it before I ever noticed. "And they are watching," I added, my voice steady but lower now, more certain. He did not look toward the car, he did not acknowledge it with anything but a slight shift in his gaze forward. "They are waiting to understand what you are," he said, and the way he said it made my chest tighten, not from fear but from the weight of being seen as something undefined, something in between. I took a slow breath and followed him as he moved toward a different car parked just a few yards away, darker, sleeker, blending into the night in a way that felt intentional. He opened the passenger door without hesitation, without asking, and paused just long enough for me to decide. I looked at the open space, then back at him, and realized there was no pressure in the moment, no force, no expectation, just an understanding that the choice had already been made before we reached this point. I stepped forward and got in the seat, the leather cool against my hands, grounding me in something real as he closed the door gently and moved around to the driver's side. The engine started smoothly, the sound quiet, controlled, like everything else about him, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the streetlights casting brief shadows across the windshield as we pulled away from the curb. I glanced once more toward the other car and saw it remain still, not following, not reacting, just watching as we left, and that somehow felt more unsettling than if it had moved. "You are not surprised?" I said after a few seconds, breaking the silence because I needed to understand the difference between his world and mine. He kept his eyes on the road, his posture unchanged. "Surprise is for things you do not anticipate," he replied calmly. "This was always going to happen once you answered." I leaned back slightly, processing that because it meant this night had not started with me, it had intersected with something already in motion, something I had unknowingly stepped into. "And now?" I asked quietly, my voice no longer uncertain, just searching for clarity. He turned slightly, just enough for me to feel his attention shift toward me without losing focus on the road, and when he spoke his voice carried that same steady certainty but with something deeper beneath it, something almost reflective. "Now," he said, "you stop being the girl who picked up the wrong phone and you start becoming the one who stayed on the line." The word settled into me, not like a warning, not like a promise, but like a truth I could not ignore, and as the city lights stretched out ahead of us I realized something that made my pulse steady. Instead of race, I had not been pulled into his world by accident, I had stepped into it by choice, and whatever came next would not just belong to him anymore, it would belong to me too.